This is an optional session just to make sure that you have a good understanding of what an agile approach is all about. Agility means the ability to move quickly and easily. This approach has been adopted by many organisations who've realised that their traditional approach doesn't really suit the level of uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that we face in our working lives these days. Let's have a look at the differences between the traditional and a more agile approach. First of all, the solution that we come up with. If we're looking at a more traditional project or change approach, then we identify what we think we should be building up front. We consult with lots of people, we identify all of the requirements, and then we stick with our original idea. But within an agile approach, we are continually questioning what comes next. We take a more emergent view of what our solution should be. So it's very flexible throughout the life of the initiative that we're managing. This is what makes it really interesting. If you ask people on the traditional approach, they would say that the time frame isn't flexible. We have a plan and we know when we're going to go live. But actually, in reality, because the solution is fixed, and therefore every element of the solution has to be delivered, very often initiatives deliver late. They also deliver over budget because of it. Whereas with Agile, we take a very different approach. We say, now hang on, this is the amount of time you've got, stick to it, flex the solution that you're able to fit into that amount of time. A very different way of looking at the world. What Agile delivers is multiple outcomes. We go live many times with new ideas. We deploy, we implement new changes. Whereas in the traditional approach, we wait until we've finished every aspect of the solution before bundling it all together so it works in completeness, and then we put it in place. Whereas with Agile, we sometimes put incomplete ideas in place because we know we can build on them later on. The issue with a fixed solution is that we end up sort of promising to deliver everything. So all of the features, the functionality, the requirements end up being promised. Whereas what we do in Agile is we're constantly looking and asking ourselves, what's the highest priority? What's the thing that's most important for me to do now? And that prioritization is based on the business need, how well that feature meets the needs of the business. What benefits does it actually deliver? What value does it deliver? Those that deliver the highest value are the must-have items. Those that deliver the lowest value, but are still interesting, they become could-have items. Leadership is different. In the traditional approach, we have more hierarchical leadership, where you have a senior person who monitors how the work is getting on. They track the progress. Whereas in Agile, the leadership role is different. It's more about making sure the team itself can succeed, monitoring whether the environment is working, if there are any roadblocks to success, and if so, getting in there and helping to fix them. And finally, the overall approach is not command and control, i.e., there's a plan, I'm going to allocate work to individuals, I'm going to tell them what's required. Instead, our approach is about collaborating with people, volunteering to get people involved so that people can select what they want to help with and to fully participate. It's a very different approach. Let's have a look at how these 6 factors play out. So let's take the traditional approach. Now, what I've got here is a representation of a Gantt chart, which shows all of the work progressing item by item against time until eventually we go live at the end of the project or the initiative. And of course, what triggers all of this is all of the ideas we've had up front at the very beginning of the initiative that we've now promised to deliver. So we've fixed our solution. The Agile approach is that we'll do a little piece of work, we'll have an idea, we'll implement it, we'll go live with it and see what happens, see what the result is. We might build further on that idea, or we might change direction and do something completely different based on the circumstances that we now face. So we're constantly checking throughout the life cycle, where are we now, what's happening in our marketplace, what would be the most useful thing to do next. So this whole idea of prioritization comes into play. It also changes, I think, the role of the leader and the sponsor, those two sort of generic roles. The person who's going to manage the initiative and the person who's sponsoring it. What tends to happen in traditional approaches is that as far as the money and the time is concerned, and I've been a project manager for more years than I care to mention, I would sit down and work out what are all the activities, all the tasks needed to deliver on the solution. I would plot them over time, and I would tell you when the go live date is. So I tell you the date, the delivery date, and from that, working out the duration of the initiative, I would be able to tell you what the budget is. But it's me telling the sponsor, if you like. Whereas in an agile approach, we flip that on its head. And if I were doing the management role, I would go to the sponsor, the person who wants the initiative to be successful, and say, what are you really trying to achieve? What return on investment are you looking for? What capabilities do you want to install? So let me understand what your end goal is, the bigger picture of your end goal, the high level summary, not every single requirement that you can think of, but just tell me, what's the big picture? What is it you're trying for me to achieve? And when do you need this done by? And how much are you prepared to invest to realize the benefits of your end goal? So it's pushing it back to where it belongs, which is back into executive management, into senior management, who are putting up the money and are committing the resources to the idea. So I think it fits better with the way the business really runs. Let's have another look at traditional versus agile approaches. Now, when I'm putting together my plan from start to finish, which is really what the traditional approach allows me to do, because the solution is fixed, I know exactly what it is I'm trying to create, and I know that I'm going to put all aspects of it together before we go live. So I can organise all of the work from start to finish. I can organise it in a logical way based on how everything links one after the other, all of the interdependencies. And I'm looking for the critical path. I'm trying to find the shortest path through to the actual go live. Some things might run in parallel, but I'm looking to see, first of all, the sequence of what happens, then what happens next, and how I can shorten that time frame. But that's that logical flow that I'm looking for. Whereas there's something going on with Agile that we have to recognise, because it's not always good news, that effectively there are potentially diseconomies of scale that build up, because what happens is that if I've done some work in the first iteration and I've gone live with it, now if I need to go back and add some more features to extend the functionality that I've offered the business, I may have to go back and unpick some of my work. So actually I'm having to sort of take away some of the things I achieved in the first iteration, unpick all of those before I can start work on the second iteration. So that adds time, it adds effort. So there's a diseconomy of scale, if you like, in this agile approach that comes up time and again. But ultimately, it's usually worth it, because although the work takes longer, we are getting much earlier go lives throughout the life of the project, which give us early and frequent return on investment. Finally, we can't ignore the fact that with a traditional approach, when we're ready to go live, this is when we're really triggering that transition curve, that change management experience that people have, where they have to abandon old ways of working and they have to get used to the new ways of working. So they go through this sort of emotional curve where perhaps their productivity falls initially because they're struggling to learn the new way of working, and they make mistakes that take time to put right, but then they come up the other side. But it does take a period of time. It's an adjustment process. It's a transition from old ways of working to new ways of working. But we accept that because we've got the whole solution and it's now in operation. In Agile, we need to remember that what happens is that we trigger that same transition from old to new ways of working. The scale of that transition might be smaller because we've implemented maybe something that's smaller in scope each time, but we've done it more frequently. So we are creating this almost continuous level of change that's happening. And so we have to accept that perhaps an agile approach has many benefits, but maybe one of the disbenefits is that it leads to a bit of change fatigue within the business, because you can see on this diagram, we have wave after wave after wave of change that people have to learn to cope with. Finally, our agile approach really does deliver this evolving solution. You can see that we build up towards the end goal, putting in place changes as we go. And this has, I think, some big advantages when we're in such an uncertain world. Effectively, by creating the evolving solution, I certainly feel more confident in the work that I'm doing, because I can work with my sponsor to understand the end goal. And we can see this blue shape down here. This is the end goal, and I know where we are today. And so I can identify the work needed that will take us towards achieving that bigger capability that they want for the organization, the improvements, the advantages, the benefits that they're aiming for. But I also recognize that at the end of one of my waves of change, in other words, an iteration, I have the opportunity to not only achieve return on investment, but also take a moment and ask, what's changed? What's different? What's happening in the environment? In other words, scan the horizon internally within the organization, but also externally within the marketplace, to find out maybe that things have actually changed a little bit. And what we need to do now is we need to get on with the next piece of work, but maybe it's pivoted slightly different direction, because the end goal has changed direction a little bit. Again, once I've delivered on that iteration, that wave of change, I'll get my return on investment, but I'll also have the chance to once again scan the horizon and ask, are we doing the most valuable and useful work? Are we heading in the same direction we've been heading in, or has something changed? And again, we might find out that things have changed, and therefore what I need to do is I need to make sure that the work I identify, maybe it's going in a slightly different direction. There's a slightly different emphasis to it. But you can see that this evolving solution enables the agile approach to really deliver value, not just the early and frequent return on investment, but also that feeling that we're up to date, that we're doing the right things at the right time. We're not committed to a solution that we may have identified and scoped maybe a year, 18 months ago, that might not be as valid today as it was when we first came up with it. With an agile approach, we are constantly scanning the horizon and asking the question, are we doing the right things?